Villa Eye of the Swamp. The Louisiana air, thick and sweet with the scent of magnolias and the smell of stagnant water, greeted them like an old, stifling acquaintance. After the noise and bustle of the French Quarter, the quiet dock on the outskirts of New Orleans, where their villa stood, seemed like the perfect escape. For the two couples fleeing their routine, this was supposed to be a weekend of luxury and relaxation. Villa Eye of the Swamp, as the booking was named, was hidden from prying eyes by a private garden with century-old oaks draped in Spanish moss. The modern building of dark wood and glass stood right on the edge of a canal leading deep into the marshes. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a hypnotizing, slightly sinister view of the still, dark water and cypress trees growing right out of the swamp. "Well, what do you say, folks?" Matthew proclaimed proudly, swinging open the heavy oak door. It was he who had found this place on a little-known rental site called Unique Hideaways. Our own piece of wilderness with all the comforts. His girlfriend, Charlotte, gasped as she stepped over the threshold. High ceilings, expensive post-industrial furniture, heated floors, and a central living area with a fireplace and access to a terrace that overhung the water itself. "Matthew, this is amazing," she whispered, and her delight was swallowed by the acoustics of the spacious hall. Scott and Taylor followed them in. Scott, a natural skeptic and tech guy, whistled, appreciating the smart home system controlled by a touch panel on the wall. Smart home, climate control, security system, perimeter cameras. "Are you sure we didn't break into someone's secret bunker?" he asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "Relax, it's all legit," Matthew replied cheerfully. "The owner is an eccentric architect. He's rarely here and rents it out cheap so the place isn't empty. We just got lucky." Taylor, an artist, was already walking through the rooms, absorbing the atmosphere. She touched the rough brickwork, the smooth glass, the cold metal of the banisters. "What a play of light and shadow," she said admiringly, watching the last rays of sun break through the Spanish moss and lay in long stripes on the polished concrete floor. "Every detail here is a contrast. It's as if someone is watching everything very closely." They didn't know how right she was. While the girls unpacked in the spacious bedrooms upstairs, Scott studied the control panel. "Strange," he muttered. "What is it?" Matthew was taking a bottle of elite bourbon from the bar. "The security system. There are a bunch of cameras outside along the fence and by the dock, but in the settings there are several more devices that are disabled. Labeled simply as OBS1, OBS2. I think they're old motion sensors they forgot to remove from the system. Or they're for alligator watching," Matthew smirked. "Pour me a drink. Don't worry about it." Scott put the panel aside, but a slight anxiety had already settled deep inside him like a splinter. The first evening was perfect. Dinner on the terrace to the accompaniment of cicadas and the distant sounds of mysterious swamp life. Laughter, bourbon, plans for tomorrow, a kayak trip through the canals. They felt like discoverers of their own private paradise. Late at night, when everyone had gone to their bedrooms, Charlotte, almost asleep to the strange chorus of frogs, reached for Matthew. Matt, the motion sensor above the door. "It's off, right?" "Of course it's off. Sleep." "Strange. I thought I saw a red light coming from there, like a tiny LED." Matthew lazily propped himself up and looked at the white plastic dome on the ceiling. "No lights, you imagined it, sunshine. It's the bourbon and tiredness. Sleep." He kissed her on the top of her head and was snoring within a minute. Charlotte stared into the darkness for a while longer, but, seeing nothing, gave up and fell asleep. At that very moment, in the heart of New Orleans, in a dark, stuffy room on the second floor of an old mansion in the Garden District, a man in his 40s with an utterly impassive face sipped coffee with chicory. On one of the monitors was Matthew and Charlotte's bedroom in infrared mode. He saw their warm silhouettes. He switched the channel. Now on the screen was Taylor, standing by the panoramic window in just a t-shirt, looking out at the dark waters of the canal. The man zoomed in closer, closer still. He saw every crack in the glass, every mole on her neck, every glint of moonlight in her wide eyes. He smiled. Not an evil or gloating smile. Rather, the smile of a collector who had finally acquired a rare, long-desired specimen. He ran his finger over the screen, touching her cheek. "Welcome to Louisiana," he whispered softly into the silence of the room. The morning was humid and muggy. The plan for the day was simple: explore the surrounding canals and the kayaks provided with the villa. Scott, while the others were getting ready, went back to the control panel. Curiosity gnawed at him. He went deeper into the system settings, into the engineering menu, access to which was protected by the password Bayou 23. And there he found it. Not disabled sensors, active cameras, a dozen devices scattered throughout the house. Their feed was being transmitted somewhere outside. The IP address was encrypted. An icy wave rolled down his spine. "Guys," he said, and his voice sounded unnaturally loud in the relaxed atmosphere, "we have a problem." They gathered around him and he showed them what he had found. On the panel was a list of cameras. Living room fireplace, kitchen vent, bedroom 1 sensor, bedroom 2 painting, bathroom mirror. A dead silence fell. The only sound was the water lapping against the pylons under the terrace. "Is this a joke?" Taylor asked uncertainly. "Maybe the owners are just monitoring the house's condition?" "No," Scott replied grimly. "The broadcast is live, right now. Someone sees and hears everything we do here. Everything we say." Charlotte paled. She remembered the tiny red light in the bedroom. "I saw it," she exhaled. "Last night. On the sensor." Matthew, always impulsive, jumped up, grabbed a heavy book on Southern architecture from the table, stood on a chair and hit the plastic dome on the ceiling with it. The cracked casing fell off, revealing not a motion sensor inside but a tiny lens. Next to it blinked that same red LED. The silence became thick, heavy, oppressive. Paradise had turned into a gilded cage. "Luxurious but a cage. We need to call the police." Matthew was the first to break the silence, already pulling out his phone. "No service," Taylor said hollowly, looking at her device. "And the Wi-Fi's down for some reason." Scott checked the panel. The local house network was working, but the internet connection was dead. Someone had remotely disabled it. They were isolated. A restrained cold panic began to eat away at them from the inside. They began a frantic search. They found a camera disguised as a black button on the vent hood, a lens embedded in the frame of a gloomy engraving of the Louisiana wilderness in the living room, a tiny hole in the pattern of the wrought iron fireplace screen. Each found lens was a blow to their sense of security. "What do they want?" Charlotte whispered hysterically, hugging her shoulders. "Money. We're just tourists. Maybe it's a maniac?" Taylor suggested, her voice trembling. "Who hunts tourists?" Scott sat on the sofa, his head in his hands. "It's not a maniac," he said finally. "A maniac wouldn't invest in a system like this. It's business. Dark websites, where rich eccentrics pay for access to other people's lives. For a reality show where the participants don't know they're actors. We're live dolls to them. Entertainment against an exotic swamp backdrop." The realization of this was worse than the thought of a maniac. It was a complete devaluation of their intimacy. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of weakness, it was all a commodity. A spectacle. Suddenly, from the central smart home speaker, which had until then been playing blues, came a quiet, even male voice. It was electronically distorted, devoid of emotion like a navigator's voice, but with a slight southern accent. Content quality improvement proposal. Theme argument. Scenario jealousy. "Matthew, Charlotte suspects you of having a thing for Taylor. Base this on her increased attention to Scott last evening. Reward for convincing performance. Restoration of external communications for 1 hour." They froze. The voice wasn't from outside. It was here inside. It heard them. It was answering them. "Go to hell," Matthew yelled at the empty ceiling. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice answered instantly, just as calmly. "I am the viewer. I require the show to continue. Scenario rejected. Penalty, air conditioning disabled." Somewhere in the bowels of the house something clicked. The barely audible hum of the climate control died. The wet, heavy heat of Louisiana began to instantly fill the space. Their world, already shrunk to the size of the villa, became even tighter and more hostile. They were lab rats in a maze whose owner watched them and conducted experiments. From that moment on, their real nightmare began. The voice returned periodically, offering new scenarios. It commented on their actions. It knew everything. It saw Scott trying to cover the camera in the fireplace with gum and mockingly praised him for his show of will. It saw Charlotte crying and offered her a bonus of cold water from the bar if she made it more expressive. They ceased to be two couples. They became four hunted, paranoid creatures. They whispered. They avoided touching each other. They flinched at every click of the system. With the onset of the second night, the tension peaked. Sitting in the dark was unbearable. Turning on the lights meant providing the viewer with better quality. Scott found the camera in their bedroom, in the smoke detector. He tore it down and smashed it on the floor. Silence reigned for a few minutes. Then the landline phone, which they hadn't noticed before, rang. Matthew picked up the receiver. "Damage to property will result in the most severe sanctions," said the same voice, now without distortion. It was a normal male voice with a velvety southern accent, intelligent, almost friendly, and that was even more terrifying. "You surely don't want your friends and colleagues to see the most compromising moments of your stay here? We have excellent editing skills. New Orleans is a small town." They understood this was not a game. It was an ultimatum. Their lives, their reputations were on the line. "What do you want?" Matthew asked, his voice breaking with helplessness. "I've already said, for the show to continue, the finale must be spectacular. Choose. Either you create it yourselves according to my scenario, or I will create it myself. I recommend the first option. It is less traumatic for your resume." The phone line went dead. They sat all night in the living room back to back, staring into the void. They were exhausted. Scott's rational arguments, Matthew's anger, Taylor's attempts to calm everyone down, all shattered against the wall of total control. Charlotte just cried quietly, tired even of being afraid. Towards morning, when the first weak light began to break through the Spanish moss, the voice returned one last time. It sounded from all the speakers at once, loud and clear. Final scenario. Title: Sacrifice in the Name of Love. Conditions: before sunrise, one of you must leave. Leave forever. The remaining 3 will be released immediately. A boat is waiting at the dock. The choice is yours. Provide a finale worthy of the spectacle. The silence that followed these words was deafening. They looked at each other. The same thing was reflected in their eyes. Horror, distrust, and somewhere deep down, a cold, worming question. What if there was no one to trust? Trust was impossible. They were finally divided. Each on their own. Each in their own cage of fear and suspicion. They didn't see how, in that very mansion in the Garden District, the man leaned back in his chair. On the main screen were their faces, distorted by the agony of choice. He picked up the remote from the table and zoomed in. A close-up, a tear on Charlotte's cheek, Matthew's clenched fist, Taylor's lost gaze, Scott's desperate eyes. He smiled his collector's smile. This was the best shot. The most valuable thing. The moment when the human soul breaks. The finale was unimportant. The process was what mattered. And at the villa eye of the swamp, the first rays of sunlight fell on the dark waters of the canal and on the 4 people frozen in anticipation. They didn't know the cameras were still there. They didn't know release was just part of the scenario. And the silence was torn by the first scream. And from the swamp, as if in response, came a dull, drawn-out splash. Charlotte screamed. wasn't just a frightened cry, but a sound of complete final breakdown ripped from the depths of her soul. She was looking at Scott, who was slowly getting up from the floor, and his eyes held a superhuman tension. He wasn't attacking. He was just staring, and that stare was more terrifying than any rage. "Him!" screamed Charlotte, pointing a finger at Scott. "He should go. He's the one who brought us all here. He found that cursed website. He wanted us to come here." Matthew instinctively stepped forward, shielding her. The logic of a drowning person was grasping at straws. Yes, it was Scott who first started fiddling with the system. He found the cameras. All too conveniently, all too knowledgeably. "Stop it, Charlotte," Scott rasped. "You know that's nonsense. He wants us to think that." "Why not you?" Taylor's voice held a steeliness no one had heard before. She was looking at Matthew. "You were so eager to come here. You set it all up. You were so happy you found this hole. Maybe you knew we wouldn't be alone here." Suspicion, poisonous and sticky, crept through the room, enveloping them like swamp mist. They retreated from each other, forming a hostile triangle. The viewer's voice had done its job, sowed the seeds of discord, and now they were sprouting into a rampant, poisonous flower of paranoia. The dull splash outside repeated. Closer. Matthew lunged to the panoramic window, peered into the pre-dawn gloom. Right by the dock, in the shadow of a cypress tree, that same boat was rocking on the water, old with an outboard motor, their path to freedom, or a trap. "The boat's here," he threw over his shoulder. This brought them back to reality for a moment, but the reality was horrifying. The choice remained the same. Someone had to go. "I'm not going," whispered Taylor, pressing herself against the wall. "I'm not going out there alone. Into that." She nodded toward the swamp, where something was stirring and rustling in the darkness. Suddenly, the lights in the living room went out. Simultaneously, all the screens of the smart home turned on. On each one, their own faces, recorded just minutes ago. Charlotte, sobbing in the corner. Matthew, clenching his fists. Scott, punching the wall. Taylor, staring into emptiness with a crazed look. The footage was edited, cutting from one to the other, creating a ready-made film of their despair. Then the image changed. A close-up. A luxurious office in a skyscraper. Their boss, Mr. Hamilton, was sitting at the desk. He was looking straight ahead and smirking. And on the wall behind him, instead of a painting, hung a huge screen. And on that screen, they saw themselves. Right now, scared and confused in the dark living room. "No." Scott exhaled. "Is that Mr. Hamilton?" Taylor finished for him, her voice empty. The viewer's voice filled the room again, but this time it didn't come from the speakers. It came from everywhere. "Time's up. The entertainment has been exquisite, but all good things must come to an end. The finale will be an improvisation." The door to the terrace unlocked with a quiet click. The humid, heavy air rushed in, carrying the smell of decay and blooming magnolias. The mixture became unbearable. Outside in the darkness, something stirred. Not one thing, but several. A quiet, wet slapping sound was heard on the wooden decking of the terrace. Then another. Charlotte screamed again, but this time the sound got stuck in her throat. A creature crawled out of the darkness onto the terrace. It was pale, slimy, with long limbs and overly large, completely black eyes. It moved awkwardly, as if unused to solid ground, and a wet trail dragged behind it. A second one appeared behind it. A third. These weren't alligators. This was something else. Something ancient and infinitely alien that had lived in these swamps long before humans. They didn't attack. They just stood and watched with their empty eyes blocking the exit. They came for the one who has to go," whispered Matthew. Scott looked around desperately. His gaze fell on the fireplace poker. "He grabbed it! Get back!" he yelled, brandishing the makeshift weapon. "Get away!" The creatures didn't react. One of them slowly turned its head towards him. and a quiet gurgling sound escaped its slightly open maw. And suddenly laughter came from the speakers. That same voice, the viewer's voice, but now it held genuine, almost childlike joy. Oh, bravo. The instinct of self-preservation. An attempt to fight. A magnificent plot twist. The subscribers are delighted. Understanding struck like lightning. They weren't just actors in a reality show. They were gladiators in an arena. Their suffering, their struggle, it was all just entertainment for an unknown audience. And these creatures were part of the show. Trained pets, or more terrifyingly, slaves themselves. Taylor slowly walked to the central wall, to the screen where Mr. Hamilton was still smirking. "What do you want from us?" she shouted, and her voice held no fear, only pure, cold rage. "We don't know you. We've done nothing to you." Mr. Hamilton's face on the screen came to life. He leaned forward as if peering at them. "You exist," his voice sounded now without distortion. "And that is enough. The world is boring. Your mediocrity, your dreams, your fears, they are banal. But this, what happens when those fears become the only reality. This is art, and I am its connoisseur." Simultaneously with his words, one of the creatures on the terrace lunged forward. A long, bony limb with webbing flashed through the air and grabbed Scott's hand, the one holding the poker. A crunch was heard. Scott screamed in pain and terror. This wasn't a warning. This was the beginning. Matthew rushed to help his friend, but a second creature cut him off. Charlotte was having a hysterical fit. Taylor stood rooted to the spot, staring at the screen. She saw Hamilton taking a delighted sip of wine, watching the proceedings, and at that moment something clicked in her head. She understood. The rules of the game were different. You couldn't defeat these creatures. You couldn't run away. You could only make the show more spectacular, more valuable. She slowly turned to the camera embedded in the picture frame. She looked directly into the lens, and she smiled. It wasn't a sincere smile, but a horrifying, theatrical grimace full of defiance and madness. "All right," she said quietly, but loud enough to be heard. "You want a show? You'll get one." She spun around sharply, grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the table, and hurled it with all her might not at the creature, but at the huge panoramic window. The cracked, but unbroken glass rang out. For a moment, everything froze. Even the creatures stopped. The laughter from the speakers ceased. "What are you doing?" Matthew hissed. "I'm changing the rules," Taylor yelled back, already grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the mantelpiece. "He wants a perfect finale according to his script?" "He won't get a finale. He won't get his art." She threw the candlestick at the window again. The crack grew, spreading across the entire surface of the glass. "Stop her!" Hamilton's voice rang out from the speakers. For the first time, notes of genuine panic were audible in it. The creature holding Scott threw him aside and rushed at Taylor. But it was too late. On the third attempt, with the help of a fire extinguisher ripped from the wall by Scott, they shattered the window. Not only air burst into the living room, but also the sounds of the swamp, deafening, alive. And with this air, the creatures poured into the room. Not two, not three, but dozens. They crawled out of the darkness, from the terrace, from the water, attracted by the noise and light. On the screen, Hamilton's face was contorted with rage. He was shouting something, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos unfolding in the living room. This was no longer controlled horror. This was chaos. Real, genuine, unpredictable. Taylor, Matthew, bleeding Scott, and crazed Charlotte fought back desperately, retreating towards the broken window. Beyond it was only a narrow strip of the dock, dark water, and the boat. "To the boat," Matthew shouted, supporting Scott. They tumbled out onto the dock. The creatures, stunned by the sudden space and the light of the dawning day, didn't immediately rush after them. Matthew started the motor. The old engine sputtered, choked, and roared to life. They were pulling away when the first creatures were already sliding off the terrace into the water and starting to swim after them, leaving sinister V-shaped wakes on the dark water. They didn't look back. They looked at the villa Eye of the Swamp, which was slowly shrinking. On its terrace, among the crawling creatures, they saw a lone figure, a man in dark clothes. He stood and watched them leave. It wasn't Hamilton. This was the one who controlled everything from within, the director, and his posture suggested not anger but curiosity, as if the experiment had entered a new, even more interesting phase. The boat broke out into the open water of the canal. Were they saved? They didn't know. They were wounded, in shock, betrayed. They didn't know that in the mansion in the Garden District the man smiled and leaned back in his chair. On the main screen the final frame was frozen, their boat disappearing into the morning mist. "Magnificent," he whispered. "The apotheosis. Unexpected, crude, but so alive. The ratings are through the roof. And the finale. Oh, the finale is just beginning. After all, where will you sail to, my actors? Who will believe your story, and whose camera is watching you right now?" He picked up a glass from the table, raised it in a toast to the screen. "Until we meet again."